Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Microsoft Surface Laptop 3 on the left and the Lenovo Yoga C940 on the right. Now, before I get into my experience with each of these laptops, let's go over pricing and specifications. So for $1,699 US, that's the build I have on the left, this is the 15-inch matte black Surface Laptop 3. It has an AMD Ryzen 5 3580U processor, 16 gigs of RAM, and 256 gigs of storage. The Lenovo, on the other hand, is priced at $1,749 and has an Intel Core i7 10th Gen Ice Lake processor. That's the 1065 G7, complemented by 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage. Now, pricing may make these machines seem similar. In fact, the fact that the Surface Laptop 3 has a 15-inch display and the Lenovo has a 14-inch display probably makes them seem even more similar. But I can assure you they really aren't. And that's because the AMD chipset inside of the Surface Laptop 3 really does not hold its own. It, in fact, doesn't come really close to what the Yoga has under the hood with Intel's 10th Gen Ice Lake processor. It also can't hold its own when it comes to gaming compared to the Iris Plus graphics on board here. The Vega that, Microsoft said they partnered, they have their own custom chipset here. It really just doesn't approach, at least in both benchmarking and real world gaming that I've done with this machine and with the Lenovo, it doesn't come close. So know that right out of the gate, that even though they're only separated by $50, they are worlds apart in terms of performance. Now, that doesn't mean that the AMD can't do things. It absolutely can. But would I recommend it for its price point? No. Not when your other option is the Yoga. And inherently, I feel like the Microsoft product, and I've mentioned this in my update as well as my unboxing, it appears that Microsoft is going after Apple users, because I'm really not sure who else would want to fork over $1,700 for this machine. Now, let's get right into the actual displays, okay, and the audio performance. I've already talked about the processor, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but there's not a whole lot to say. I want to talk about the display and the sound quality. So let's start with the Surface Laptop 3. And let me make sure I have this set to 4K, which I don't. Now it will be. Let's, did I not select it? I could have sworn I did. A little bit of buffering going on here. And it figures that this would happen, right? It's like the blue screen of death during the keynote. Let's wait for the program and see what happens. And while that tries to clean up its act, let's go over to the Lenovo. Now, the Lenovo is displaying 4K. It has a UHD LCD screen, 14 inches, not 15 inches, far more color accurate. It is HDR certified and a pleasure to look at. Audio performance is also very good with their Dolby Atmos soundbar right here. I'm going to stop that right here. Apparently this is still choking, so let's close it. And as I said, it just figures. This isn't my first take, and hopefully it'll be my last, though. And I'm keeping it real, as usual. So let's reopen that. Let's see if the Surface Laptop can get its act together. I'll try to restore. And one thing I was going to mention is that the Surface Laptop, much like all the other Surface products this year so far, really does have best-in-class Wi-Fi performance. If there was one thing where I would tell you the Surface Laptop 3 does outperform the Lenovo, it's the Intel Wi-Fi chipset. But let's get back at it right now. I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen. Remember, this is not a 4K display. It does not have the color accuracy of the Yoga. It doesn't have the HDR rating. It pretty much has none of the attributes other than the fact that it does have a 3:2 aspect ratio, which for many of you may be your preference. It's really a matter of personal preference. Take a look and a listen. Little choppiness happening right there, which generally isn't the case. It's looking a little choppy. I'm wondering what is going on here with the Surface Laptop 3. It's having trouble. And I don't think we should give it a break and take it out of 4K, because it's not really displaying 4K after all. But I've had enough. So this is kind of making my point, because even though this hasn't been the story of my experience with the Surface Laptop 3, the fact that it's even happening does speak to what I've been getting at, which is that the internals of this machine are paltry at best for its price point. And in order to replicate what we have in the Yoga C940, just the internal specifications, at least what Microsoft is selling as their highest end version of this machine, meaning we're still working with an AMD processor. You can get Intel if you go for the business model, but if you were to stick with the consumer model, you'd be spending $2,100 to match the Yoga, but you still wouldn't be matching it. You still would not have the 4K color accurate 500 nit brightness HDR display. You would not have the included pen that's in the garage on the back, which I'll get to. You don't have a 2-in-1 experience. In fact, you just have a really big footprint with, in my opinion, Ultrabook specs, which I feel like is only something an Apple consumer would want. And I, as I've said before, believe that Microsoft is going after that exact group of consumers. Now, when it comes to, let's see if it now can play. It's trying. Still struggling. So I'm going to end this experiment right now. Again, this is unique. I don't know why it's failing, but I'm not doing more takes of this. It's having problems, and that's what it is. But when it comes to the audio performance, it also is not on par with the Lenovo. This soundbar, the Dolby Atmos soundbar that they've built onto the Hinge, deeper, richer audio. There's nothing wrong with the audio on the Surface Laptop 3. It's just not as good as what you're getting with the Yoga. So, moving away from that, let's take a look at the color accuracy. If you didn't get enough from the video samples, just look at the color white, look at the brightness difference on these two machines, tell me what you see. I know what I see. And again, the 3:2 aspect ratio is something that I'm sure many people prefer, but I would not want it at the expense of color fidelity, color accuracy overall. And even though we have, 4K on the right, let's take 4K out of the equation. So this is just a full HD display, which you can get the Lenovo in a full HD display. It's going to save you some money, and it still would be better than what we're looking at on the left. I know that from having seen it in person. So I am not one to say I will choose a 3:2 aspect ratio in favor of taking an inferior display. And generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with the Surface lineup of displays, but they are becoming very long in the tooth. This was okay for 3 years ago. It's not okay today. And granted, the 15-inch didn't exist 3 years ago, but even looking at the Surface Book 2, we still don't have a UHD display. It's nearly, but not 4K. Close. And with the Surface Book 3, I imagine we will finally get a 4K display in a laptop from Microsoft, but come on, that's going to be in 2020. Give me a break. And God knows what they're going to charge for that. I don't even want to think about that. Another reason I believe that Microsoft has stuck with this substandard resolution and display for that matter, even though it's still good, it's just not great, is battery life. And that's the other area that the Surface Laptop 3 will outperform the Yoga. Now, if I had the Yoga with a full HD display, that wouldn't be the case. So that, again, tells you what Microsoft is after with this machine. So let's move away from the displays. And by the way, they're both at 100% brightness for those of you that are curious. You'll see right now, 100%, okay? And 100%. We were also at max volume, if you were wondering, 100. Well, close. I was at 90. At any rate, and that wasn't to throw anybody off, trust me. The display winner is clear. It goes to the Yoga. Let's get off of the display and let's talk about the keyboard. Let's talk about the actual experience typing. The Surface Laptop 3, in my opinion, has one of the best aesthetics on the market. The design is good, but I feel like we have a tremendous amount of wasted space. Considering this is a 15-inch laptop, it has a 15-inch laptop's footprint, still very lightweight and still very well made. In fact, I think it's nicer than anything you'll get from Apple. And it's just as limiting though, which bothers me. But the keyboard, nice travel on these keys, very similar on the Lenovo. I'm not in love with Lenovo's curved keys. The touchpads also very, very similar. I would say that the Surface just has the larger touchpad. Does that make it better? No, only if you must have a touchpad this size. And again, this does remind me of Apple with their gigantic, ridiculous touchpad that actually I think is ugly. I don't care how much you pitch it on being more functional. It really isn't. It ends up looking like, you know, why not just make this whole thing a touchpad at that point? Oh, then you'll have nowhere to put your wrists. Yeah, point made. At any rate, I do like this trackpad. I like this one too. Do I need this size? No, but if you do, you have your option. So that's a good thing. But I think the one on the Yoga does perfectly fine. And again, the keyboard's very similar, nearly identical. More functions though on the Yoga. You even have a privacy key for the camera, even though there is a physical switch up here at the webcam. No Windows Hello on the Yoga. We, of course, have that with the Surface Laptop 3. Like any Surface machine, they're not going to omit Surface Hello. So, power button, by the way, on the keyboard of the Surface Laptop 3. Of course, on the Yoga, it's on the right side, where I think it really belongs. That's just my opinion. Beyond the keyboard, we have a fingerprint reader on the Yoga. We do not have one here on the Surface Laptop 3, and that's because Microsoft has chosen to stick with Windows Hello rather than having both options. In the Yoga's case, it needs to have this because it does not have Windows Hello, like many other machines out there, whether we're talking about the XPS 13 2-in-1 or the HP Spectre X360 that I've been reviewing that has both the fingerprint scanner and Windows Hello IR. So just something to be aware of. So I've talked about the screen. By far and away, this is the winner. I've talked about the keyboard, the touchpad. I've talked about audio performance being superior on the Yoga. Let's get into the inking and the touchscreen experience. So that's one thing where Microsoft does a really great job, and I'm not going to tell you that the Yoga is better, but I will say I enjoy the Yoga more. And one of the key reasons is because, after all, this is a 2-in-1. It does have the pen on the back ready to go. I'm going to show you that right now. And there it is. You can see right here. And the pen really does a nice job. Again, it is an active stylus. It does recharge in this little garage, as they call it. I don't want to drop the machine onto its competitor. But, you know, it does a nice job, and it's compact. It has a place to go. I do wish it was a little bit larger. We've got 2 buttons on board the Yoga stylus. It is a Wacom pen, so it does well. I mean, who else are you going to turn to? Microsoft leans on N-Trig, so this will not work on this screen. I don't love that Microsoft charges for their stylus, but that was always bound to happen. We only got the included stylus for, what, the first 3 years, I think, and then they dropped it. And that was before it was really a mainstream product. Here, the stylus works really well. It may be one of the best in the business in terms of a 2-in-1 that's ready to go out of the box included, and that there happens to be a place for it to be stored, which I think is a win across the board for consumers. So inking, I'm giving to the Yoga because you can't ink with this out of the box. It's just not possible. You have to buy an extra accessory. So that's another thing that makes the Surface Laptop 3 inherently more expensive. So where does the Surface Laptop 3 shine? I would have to say it's really just on the aesthetic, the build quality. And considering the Lenovo is really the closest in terms of build quality to this machine at all. In fact, the Yoga precedes it. It predates the Surface Laptop 3, of course. This is the first generation of 15-inch Surface laptop that we've ever had. It's also, you know, the first generation with AMD, which is, in my opinion, not a good thing. It's really just a way for Microsoft to see whether or not consumers will pay the same amount of money for a product that costs them less to build. And that's something I'm not in love with about the Surface Laptop 3. And this may sound like I'm just here to rag on the the Surface Laptop 3, but it's not. It's just a matter of what Microsoft put together for us. So build quality, it's a great machine, but what's under the hood does count. And even though Microsoft gives you the cleanest Windows experience, a lot of junk here pre-installed with the Lenovo, a lot of crap you're going to want to get rid of, this is still the better overall computer. And I'm saying regardless of price. Okay? When we come down to what's inside of each of these, the Lenovo is better on every front. And when it comes to benchmarking, I benchmarked both of these heavily. I've gamed on both of them. The AMD does not come close. And granted, this is the Core i7, and I could have gone with a higher model 15-inch, the next level of AMD processor, the Ryzen 7 that they offer. The fact that it doesn't even get close with the 16 gigs of RAM tells me enough. And when it comes to video editing, this had the worst Cinebench benchmark of any of the machines I'm reviewing right now. It actually underperforms the Core i5 in the Surface Pro 7. So that tells you a lot about what kind of piece of crap this AMD chip is. And trust me, I'm rooting for AMD. It's good to have competition with Intel, but this is just not where it's at, folks. It's just not. Backlighting on these keyboards, I didn't mention, they're about the same. There's nothing really to talk about there. But I just wish that Microsoft wouldn't treat us, I hate to say it, but like Apple customers, because that's exactly what I feel they did. So let me just go ahead, before I show you the body, the rest of the ports on each of these machines, I'm going to pull up some news here. Okay. And again, the biggest win for the Surface Laptop 3 is its networking. It's Wi-Fi. And pinch to zoom on both of these, very nice. It's definitely a little bit better on the Surface product, but negligible. That's just because Microsoft has kind of set the standard in the industry. That's my opinion. And if I go ahead, I didn't hit those exactly at the same time. And I certainly don't want to see this, so I'm going to get out of it on both. But I don't want to see anything to do with him. But again, this is all about what you're getting for your money. And if you want the Microsoft identity, you've got it here. I recommend going with the 13.5-inch version just so you get the Intel chipset. It's superior. If you're going to spend this much money, do yourself a favor. You can get the 15 inch. As I mentioned, the business model does have the Intel 10th gen Ice Lake processors. So that's another way to go. But what's online, what's being sold by everyone is the AMD build. Of course, the 13.5-inch to me is more compelling just because it's got those 10th gen Intel chipsets. But I've kind of gone over everything. Cinebench, I already said, this is horrible. This is competent. And that's in performance mode here. If I talk about gaming, for example, the Tomb Raider benchmark that I have installed in here from Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 28 frames per second in performance mode here. This, on the other hand, is putting out what this does in like the quiet setting, okay? Somewhere around, I think it was 18 frames per second. That may not sound like a lot, but it is. It's a big difference. And that's with both of these being set to 720p, by the way. So gaming, there's a big difference in terms of overall software that you're going to be able to run smoothly, that's intensive. Big difference here with the Lenovo. Again, the Core i5 Surface Pro 7 outperforms this thing. And that's with 8 gigs of RAM, not 16. So I really can't recommend this machine in this configuration at all. With the Core i7, it'd be a different story. Even with the Core i5, it would be a different story. But the AMD is just a trash bag. I have no other way of putting it. Anyone who says otherwise is blowing smoke up your ass. In terms of other things that you should know, I already said battery life on the left is better, but if we got a full HD Lenovo, it would be better on the right. So this doesn't have a hell of a lot going for it. And then if I close it up and we forget about this nice little aesthetic and we look at the external aesthetic, this is something I want to cover as well, because you all know, or even if you don't, the Yoga has the ability to become a 2-in-1 and go to tablet mode. It's got that flexibility, and I don't expect that. That's not part of the review for a reason. But when I close these up, okay, some of you have asked me, is the matte black finish a fingerprint magnet? The answer is yes. It is. It looks dirty inherently. I don't know what Lenovo did with the finish on this Yoga, and I didn't mention it in my comparison to the Spectre, and I should have. It stays clean. It's kind of amazing. Even with my hands, it's pretty amazing. This thing just, it looks like I've wiped it down, and I haven't. Whereas the Surface always looks pretty much always looks dirty. And that's not unique. I mean, if I grab the, the HP, it looks filthy also. Here it is, filthy, filthy HP. Same applies to the Surface Pro 7. So somehow Lenovo's done something magical with this build because fingerprints really are a non-issue. That's another thing I wanted to point out. I think it's pretty important. Beyond that, the final thing, which if you're buying a Surface laptop, you probably don't give a crap, but I'm going to show you, there's just nothing on this. We've got the proprietary charging slot right there, the port, and then there's nothing else, which is a beautiful thing. I mean, we just have a headphone jack right here, trying to bring them into focus. Come on, come on, come on, come on. So we've got a Type A USB 3.1, or 3.0, I mean, and a Type C jack, but no Thunderbolt here. I mean, this is for connectivity. You can charge with this, so that's nice. Something the previous gen didn't have. So it's an improvement, but that's it. There's nothing else on this machine. And the Yoga, on the other hand, while also keeping it really minimal. I mean, there's the power button. I mentioned in my previous review, we've got the little butt cheek hinge, which I'm nitpicking. The speaker is great, so that's really the hinge. We've got the garage for the pen, as they call it, where it recharges and stores it. And no spring like previous gen, so it's not going to pop out or break. And then we have a Type A USB port. We have two Type C ports, which means you've got Thunderbolt, which is kind of a big deal. I mean, that inherently makes this more capable than its counterpart to the left. And then your headphone jack. And that's it. So this keeps it really clean also, and I don't just mean the fingerprints, but on the design, and delivers a lot more horsepower. And I don't know when we're going to see a Surface laptop or Surface product with Thunderbolt. I imagine it'll be next year. By then, we may be talking about other things. I mean, I'm not being literal, but it's possible, right? I mean, USB 4 is already being spoken about, so I'm not sure. I think this is all just Microsoft seeing how long people are willing to wait. Now, the last thing I'll point out is that when you open this with one hand, Microsoft has pulled off the balance. Notice that? Here, with the Yoga, when I do the exact same move, by the time I get midway, it lifts. If that's your reason for not buying the Yoga, it's time to reassess your lifestyle. But no, I got to show you. I'm showing you everything. So let's get back to the summary. The better machine is the Yoga. I do like the design of the Surface laptop more in both its 15-inch and 13.5-inch variety, but the Yoga wins in every single department. Screen, processor, pen input coming natively out of the box, audio performance, battery life, I'm going to call a wash because we don't have apples to apples with the screen types, but if we did, the Yoga would have better battery life. So even though the Surface laptop has better battery life here, I think it's kind of a fake out. The only thing the Surface laptop has going for it besides its good looks, it's wireless networking. As I've mentioned, that Wi-Fi chipset from Intel was a very big upgrade for what Microsoft was putting into their hardware. Beyond that, the Yoga wins in absolutely every category. So unless you hate Lenovo for some odd reason, this should be your choice. And you get a 2-in-1 bonus. That rounds things out. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.